No, because it's all borrowed money by the banks.
Right. So where is the money coming from?
See, the problem is they're already leveraged 40-1. So, and they keep two sets of books. They're all broke. And so, in order to make this happen without going higher in their leverage to deposits of 40-1, they will use the money at 10-1, 9-1 maybe. And let's say it's 9-1. So if they do $500 billion at 9-1, that's $4.5 trillion. And that's what they need for the next 2 years. And it's total monetization plus whatever is out there. And I think this has been in their planning for a long time, and I'll tell you why. Over the last 15 months, they brought down M3 from a monthly increase of about 17% down to close to a minus 10%. And that is about $500 billion. And so the first $500 billion that's created in the increase in money and credit compared to what it was before is a wash. And so that gives them some room to play with the whole thing. And this is what they're up to. And they are going to inflate it again. But, you know, with gold, you've got two things going for you. It's now become the world currency. And second of all, now we're going to have inflation.
Well, do you think we're going to have inflation? I mean, certainly a lot of people keep talking about the danger of deflation, and that's why they want to stimulate the economy. And of course, the only way they can do that is putting more money into circulation. Could you explain to people how it is that the government's put out, I don't know, Federalists put out, between the stimulus and the Fed, a couple of $1 trillion, and yet, of course, the M3 has fallen. This gets so confusing because the M3 is a mediator. It's a measure of all the money, all the American money in circulation. How could they be putting all this money out and the M3 be falling? This is so confusing for the average individual, and I'm sure you could explain it to our listeners.
Well, the M3 is coming down, but what they're not telling you is they're lending trillions of dollars to foreign central banks. And the reason they're doing that is to give them dollar balances. But more important, it allows the foreign central banks to take the dollars, go to the auction, buy treasuries and agency bonds, and then hold them in their behalf so that they have dollar collateralization. At the same time, it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the Fed. But the Fed's not going to tell anybody anything because they hide everything, and what they don't hide, they lie about. And so, consequently, there's a lot of money out there that you don't know about. I mean, even the auction sales for the Treasury are double what they should be. They're collecting twice as much money as they need. I don't know why, but that's what they're doing. It was in my last issue. And another thing, too, in regard to the dollar, it's broken down technically in a head and shoulders, which is the worst negative technical formation that you can have. And the dollar's through. That was its last gasp, having run from 74 to 89 in like 3 months. It's back down close to 80 now. It'll go to 74 and test, probably bounce, because the euro probably, which is 131, will probably sell back off to somewhere between 121 and 125. And that probably temporarily will keep the dollar from falling through 74. But once it does, it could go to 35, 40, 45. And that's when they'll have a big meeting, and like they have in the past. And everybody gets together, and they revalue and devalue all the currencies, and they also go into default. And my guess is the default and the adjustment in currencies, the losses will be about 2/3.
Well, when you
So
say
if you have
default,
$1, it'll be worth 32 cents.
well, when you say default, it means they're just not going to pay on their debts. They're not going to pay the bonds back. Is that what you're meaning?
Well, I think what they'll do is pay 30 cents on the dollar for the bonds in the future. 2/3 of the debt will be written off.
What will happen to these guaranteed annuities? What will happen to Social Security and Medicare?
They'll all drop an equal amount.
And ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand that they don't have the money. It's a Ponzi scheme. And you know what they did to Bernie Madoff when the Ponzi scheme ran out? They put him in prison. But are you going to put the congressman in prison who've been actually running a Ponzi scheme with Social Security and Medicare, and now there's not enough money coming in? This is why we're running the tremendous deficits. And we'll be back in just a moment with Bob Chapman here at Radio Liberty. So with Bob Chapman, and Bob, we were just talking about what she could do. Bob says get freeze-dried food, get something to defend your family. It's a means of having water, and get yourself in the right shape as far financially as best you can, because we're heading for a very difficult time. And of course, I would suggest be sure that you have a proper relationship with the Lord, because I really believe that's all going to sustain most of us in the time that lies ahead. We may very lose all we have materially, and people don't like to hear that. But I would say that God is going to bring his judgment on this country when we find that the President of the United States will back the United Nations gay agenda, when he wants, of course, to do away with the don't ask, don't tell, program in the military, when President Obama wants to block having a day of prayer, a day of Christian prayer in this country, when President Obama goes to certainly Notre Dame University, he's going to stand on the podium, but he insists they cover up the cross behind him. I think that we as a nation are in real trouble. And I believe God is going to bring his judgment here. It's not a matter of if, but when. But go right ahead, Bob.
Oh, I agree with you. And, I spent several years in the military, and I can't envision, the way that these homosexuals are. They're very motivated. And, going in the shower and, there's 100 people in there and 20 of them are groping each other. I mean, how can something like that work? It can't. I mean, it's another method of destroying what's going on. And, of course, current members of the military, they think that's dreadful. And, of course, I agree with them, and I think it's wrong. But that's where it's going to all end up.
Well, let me point out that there's a great to-do now about the leaks of of something like 90,000 government documents from what happened in Afghanistan. Something put up on Wikipedia was, of course, given to New York Times and several other newspapers around the world. And supposedly the leak has been traced back to a enlisted man named Manning. And you can read all of the articles in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal about Manning. They never mention what Cliff Kincaid mentions, and that is that Manning is a homosexual. And he wanted to get back at the government because of their anti-homosexual policies. He's been very flagrant about his homosexuality, defying the don't ask, don't tell policy. He's put on his webpage, Facebook, that he is a homosexual. He attends active homosexual demonstrations, and he released, of course, those documents to get back at the government because he hated the government. Here's a guy with the highest security clearance, and now one word of this in the controlled media, if what Cliff Kincaid says is true, it's sensational. How could they possibly suppress that when we have freedom of speech and freedom of the press?
And, of course, we don't have that. We have controlled major media, and that control is by the same group of people that we're talking about. And that's why, again, these programs are so important that you're funding them to keep them on the air, and, of course, the Internet and publications like The Forecaster that try to get into the heart of what's going on and the truth of what's going on. And believe me, we are making great inroads because the people who are opposing, they're really terrified of what we're doing. I don't think I told you, Stan. Maybe I did. But Nathan M. Rothschild in London subscribed to the International Forecaster last week.
Well, I hadn't heard that.
But no, and it's the truth. And they've heard, and they want to know what this guy is talking about.
Well,
I imagine they'll go on the site and they'll start listening to Dr. Stan.
Well, let's hope so, and let's hope that maybe they'll come around. Maybe I don't think so, but I think it's important that people understand that there is an elite that runs the world, and of course it involves the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the Mellons, and certainly all the great banking families. But of course, so many of these are in one way or another tied into the occult. Well, our telephone number is 1-888-24-LIBERTY. The 1-888-24-LIBERTY.